This video is one of 5 quick reviews of the feature films from Series 1 of the Final Girl board game, which are designed to supplement our main review of the game. We hope these will collectively form a useful guide of the settings and villains available in this series, whether you are deciding where to start your experience of Final Girl or looking to take on a new challenge. You will require a copy of the core game in order to play this or any other feature film. For the sake of brevity, unless otherwise stated, the views I expressed in our main review remain relevant for this feature film and won't necessarily be repeated in this video. Lastly, please note that this video inevitably spoils some aspects of the feature film, otherwise there's not much to talk about. We have restricted discussion of possible tactics to help you defeat this feature film to its own section, so you can skip this if you don't want any help figuring out this puzzle for yourself. However, I will comment on the overall features of the scenario throughout the video. The other videos in the series will be linked in the description below as they are published. Thanks for watching. Like all the feature films, Slaughter in the Groves is divided into 2 sections, those elements that are linked to the setting, such as the setup, events, tokens and item cards, and those components that are related to the killer. This is so that you can easily switch the killer or setting with others marked in the range, and the components are marked with symbols allowing you to track them back to the setting or the killer at the end of your game. These components are enclosed within the map board for the Sacred Groves and the Avengers killer board. You also get 2 final girls, Adelaide and Barbara in this case, which again can be used in any setting. For the purposes of this review, we're going to look at all of these components as a single cohesive expansion, without switching in other options from the wider Final Girl range, as there are so many potential combinations at this stage that it would make for a very long video. No plastic miniatures are included in the feature film, though these are available separately. You could be forgiven for underestimating Inkanyamba during your first encounter with them. 9 health makes them far from the most intimidating of the Series 1 killers, and with no native access to movement in the early game, they are reliant on terror cards to get them around the Sacred Groves and need to dispatch a few victims before their damage output is a real threat. The Avenger adds the killer's Wrath track to the game, which works much like a second horror track, albeit one with much more variable effect. It is, however, important to note the difference between increasing the value of the killer's wrath and unleashing the killer's wrath, the former simply moving the tracker, while it is the unleash keyword that triggers the effects displayed. This differs from the horror and bloodlust tracks, the effects of which trigger immediately when you reach a given level, reflecting the fact that your position on this new track can move quite rapidly during the game, in both directions. As we will see in the next section, this mechanic synergizes particularly well with the Sacred Groves. Inkanyamba's true obsession is with the victims on the board. Unlike some killers, which will typically head for the closest target whether it is a victim or a final girl, a full 12 of Inkanyamba's terror cards include attacks specifically directed towards victims. This might feel like a blessing early on, however once the victims have been eliminated, the terror cards often auto-discard, accelerating the finale and leaving you to deal with an Avenger at full bloodlust. Relatively slow and low damage in the opening turns of the game, by the time their finale card is revealed, Inkanyamba will be lightning fast, capable of reaching you from almost anywhere in the groves, and dealing out multiple powerful attacks in a turn. Failure to manage the killer's Wrath tracker will only fuel their fury. Regardless of the finale card revealed, from then on the killer's Wrath track will unleash every turn, increasing the number of attacks they can deal out, and giving them access to healing. Even the most well-prepared Final Girl will find them a challenge to overcome. Sacred Groves is broadly a figure-8 map around a mountain and a lake that provides flexibility of movement, but if you look closely, it does possess some interesting features. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, are the inclusion of the 3 sacred spaces denoted by a red border and the mask symbol. These locations convey no immediate effect upon entry, but do interact with a number of the cards in the game, which we'll discuss further in a moment. Closer attention to the map will reveal that whilst these sacred spaces can often be entered from a large number of locations, 2 of the exit spaces on the board are only accessible from a single direction each, creating some bottlenecks for your rescue operations. Like Inkanyamba, the Grove adds a new tracker in the form of Divine Wrath. Mechanically, this works identically to the Killer's Wrath mentioned in the previous section. All of the Grove's Terror cards reference the Divine Wrath mechanic to some degree, often in conjunction with effects related to sacred spaces. Leaving victims in sacred spaces is a liability, as the number of victims in these spaces will often determine the magnitude of pain created for your final girl. Some of the Terror cards also add more victims to these spaces and attract victims to move into these spaces, though some are more positive, offering the opportunity to avoid or reduce Divine Wrath, a slither of Divine Light in an otherwise monstrous location. Sacred Groves influences the killer's action more directly than most settings, adding an additional Bloodlust track to the killer board, triggering Divine Wrath related effects as the killer's Bloodlust increases, in addition to the other normal effects of the particular killer's Bloodlust track. The Grove also adds a Finale token to the killer's Finale card once it has been revealed, ensuring that Divine Wrath will both escalate and be triggered every turn from then on. However, Sacred Groves also adds 2 additional action cards that can be purchased for 2 time each as part of the planning phase. Atonement cards offer you the opportunity to reduce the Divine Wrath, or, if you are using Inkanyamba, the Killer's Wrath, with the unusual 3 successes level, allowing you to reduce one of them to 1 if you can pull it off. Like Creature Manor, Sacred Groves brings a lot of its own character, synergising well with Inkanyamba for sure, but it still feels like you are facing a second powerful adversary in addition to the killer. I'm keen to try some of the other killers in the range on this board, allowing them to adopt the mantle of the Avenger in place of Inkanyamba, and see how their own unique styles blend with this evocative setting. At 6 health, Adelaide is capable of tanking a respectable amount of damage in the context of her sister Final Girls, but she lacks access to healing from saving victims, making her reliant on rest cards if she requires any additional health during the game. When saving victims, her focus is very firmly on reducing the horror level or increasing the available time. Both of these are useful in this particular feature film, but will also make her an excellent choice against many of the killers available from other sets. The requirement to save 5 victims to unlock her final ability is not easy but is achievable, especially within the Sacred Groves where there are typically 12 victims on the board at the start and the potential for more to arrive during the course of the game. Adelaide's ultimate ability conveys an immediate one-off benefit from the choice of 3, meaning you are almost guaranteed to get something useful out of the time you have invested into saving victims. The most difficult part is usually choosing which benefit to gain. Assuming she is within the Sacred Groves or against Inkanyamba, the ability to reduce a Wrath track to 1 could be a godsend, but 6 time worth of action cards is also an opportunity to gain access to cards you might feel you are otherwise unable to afford. Among the most resilient final girls in the game, Barbara boasts 7 points of health with the opportunity to regenerate a further point from saving victims. She has no particular focus during the early stages of the game, able to derive a wide range of benefits from the 5 victims she needs to unlock her ultimate ability. That said, the ability to just take one top item card without being in the relevant search base is particularly useful. Barbara's ultimate ability is where things get really interesting. The ability to move victims through the killer's space is already situationally amazing, preventing the killer from blockading escape routes. In addition to this, Barbara can rally victims in her space to fight back, removing them from her board to add a single damage to her attack per victim removed. This effectively kills the victim, but crucially, victims that die this way do not contribute to the Bloodlust track, meaning that this both harms the killer and reduces the potential victims available for them to kill. This sounds incredible, and in the right circumstances it certainly is, but it is more difficult than you might think to use this strategy. It is relatively unusual for the killer to arrive in a space with victims but not kill at least one, at which point the victims panic and are no longer in the killer's space. The final girl, meanwhile, can usually only bring 2 victims along with her at a time, still a bonus but hardly a devastating increase in damage output. There are situations, however, where this ability can punch above its weight. My best success with this has been where the killer enters a space with a large cluster of victims and where certain dice values may result in the victim staying put during the panic phase. Given that the Sacred Groves sometimes create new victims in sacred spaces and drag adjacent victims into the same location, there is definitely opportunity to deal out some serious violence if you can time it right. I don't want to spoil the experience of Final Girl. After all, it is, at its core, a puzzle to be solved, and nothing is worse than being given the answer to a puzzle. If you want to avoid any help defeating the Avenger, this is your last chance to skip to the next chapter. That said, if you're still here, This section isn't intended to replace your own skill and decision making, just gives you my thoughts on one way you might escape the groves alive. Inkanyamba has a justifiable reputation for being difficult to defeat, however their power is largely restricted to the endgame. All killers increase in power as their bloodlust increases and with the revelation of their finale card, but the addition of the Wrath track makes the Avenger's escalation far more dangerous than most. This makes it absolutely critical that you've defeated Inkanyamba before the finale is revealed, or at worst within the first turn after the finale. My strategy for defeating the Avenger relies on early decisive action against them. I will typically use my first turn in the game exclusively to reduce horror if possible, and to move towards whichever of the closest search locations has the most promising item at the top of its deck. Ideally I'll be heading for a weapon, but defensive items also have utility here, and it is not worth wasting time crossing the full length of the board even if a distant search location suggests a better opportunity. Ensuring I have enough time left over to purchase a search card, I'll take an item at the top of turn 2. My task for the next couple of turns is to save a few victims, identifying the most efficient route to activate my ultimate ability. It sounds cold, but my aim here is not to save all victims. In this strategy, they are purely the currency I need to make my future attacks on Inkanyamba more effective. It is also worth pointing out that with no natural ability to move in the early game, it is entirely possible, though not guaranteed, that Inkanyamba will stand still with nobody to kill for the first couple of turns. Regardless of how effective I have been at gaining weapons and saving victims, my aim is always to engage Inkanyamba in battle around turn 4 or 5. I'll usually try to ensure that I do so by moving into their space, not the other way round, and that I have 2 attack cards available that I can use in the first turn, so that I whittle the killer down before they have a chance to attack me. Beyond that, defeating Inkanyamba is in many ways an escalation of everything you have learnt in Final Girl to date. Manage the horror track so that your actions are reliable, manage the wrath track so that the terror cards are less devastating, discard cards you don't need to gain time you can use to pay for those that you do. The more efficient and deliberate you can make your turns, the more chance that you will survive the Avenger. I think it would be remiss not to acknowledge that there are some elements of the theme of this feature film that may cause a certain amount of discomfort. Regardless of its inspiration, the presence of various tropes and imagery, as well as the use of the name Inkanyamba, which I understand is related to a specific Zulu belief, brings it uncomfortably close to unpleasant cliches from movies of a certain era, even if the racial identity of the killer is not explicitly confirmed. Besides this, the inference that the killer is acting in defense of sacred spaces that are being defaced by ignorant tourists and teenagers makes the Avenger's death at the hands of the final girl feel much less heroic than victory against other antagonists in the series. It's not hard to imagine an alternative and more comfortable version of this scenario, where the hero is the one trying to protect these sites instead. Wherever you personally fall on such elements, I can only honestly report that they did not prevent this feature film from being one of my favourites mechanically. Those that watched my review of the core Final Girl game will know that this was the first feature film I attempted to tackle. Despite being without a victory for months, Slaughter in the Groves never left me frustrated, only eager to try again. I never felt like I was completely without a chance versus the Avenger, often getting tantalisingly close to eliminating them, only to fail in the end. The glimmers of hope afforded by the rare positive effects of cards were enough to make me feel like my actions mattered, and that I always had the chance to win if I could only figure out how. It's also notable that the mechanics added by this feature film blend well with the other mechanics already in the game, making this among the more easy feature films to overlay onto the core rules. This makes it a potential starting point for new players to the game, provided that you understand going in, unlike me, that you are jumping in at the deep end in terms of scenario difficulty. You might think that nearly a year without victory against Inkanyamba would have spoiled my enjoyment of this feature film. Nothing could be further from the truth. The added mechanics quickly became intuitive, and the perfectly honed balance of luck versus skill turned this into a challenge that I relished. Even once I defeated the Avenger, I immediately wanted to start again. Could I win faster, deny more victim kills, attempt to win on extreme horror difficulty? That's the mark of a really well-designed and tested scenario, one that, in my view, will be hard to surpass. Of course, if you want to find out whether any of the remaining feature films in Series 1 do beat Slaughter in the Groves to become my favourite, you'll find links to our reviews of the other feature films in the description of this video if they are already released. One action that surely cannot anger the gods is hitting the sacred subscribe button to ensure that you don't miss any of our Final Girl content. It's not just feature film reviews that we have in the pipeline. As always, let me know if this video was helpful, what your experiences with this feature film have been, or what you'd like to see next in the comments. Whether you are a devoted worshipper of the channel or merely a tourist making your first visit, thank you for watching, and until we return, please remember to work hard, play better, and take care out there.